everyone, welcome back. We're a bit late, but today we're doing my June wrap up. I read 9 books in June. I actually read a mixture of audiobooks, physical books, and ebooks in June. I'll go through all of those very quickly if I can, because there's a lot to talk about here, but without further ado, I'll just jump right in. So the first book that I completed was actually an audiobook, and it was Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book in the Lunar Chronicles. This series is kind of a group of retellings of different fairy tales from, like the Grimm brothers and stuff like that. Scarlet is our second book, and it follows the kind of fairy tale of Red Riding Hood with the wolf. Our two main characters are Scarlet and Wolf. I think that listening to this in an audiobook, and also the rest of this series as well, and I think I said this last time too, but it lends itself really well to being listened to. I really enjoyed that we have overlap for the old characters as well. So when I jumped into this series, I didn't realize that it's not just the character that is introduced in this book, it's the character that's introduced in this book as well as the other characters. So we have multiple point of views, which means that we kind of get 4 point of views in this story mostly. And I will say that I really enjoyed Scarlet's story, probably a little bit more than Cinder's, which I didn't expect, but it is what it is. The only thing that I didn't love is that I did kind of feel as though if I wasn't paying attention to the story enough, the narrator for Scarlet and Cinder did kind of blend together, because I think the characters are quite similar, I guess personality-wise, which is okay because that's who they are and that's relevant to their story and their character, but I just had to watch myself a little bit there. But other than that, I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed it a bit more than I enjoyed Cinder, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I completed, obviously following on from Scarlet, is Cress by Marissa Meyer. This is the third book in the Lunar Chronicles. Also listened to this one on audiobook. This story follows our main character Cress, who is the Rapunzel retelling, and her main kind of interest in this one is a captain slash criminal slash smuggler named Carswell Thorne. What are you doing, Samson? You're gonna hate yourself, my dude. Yeah, it's not super stable. I would not recommend. Anyway, sorry, slight distract from the bird who's trying to fly to the lounge, and I'm just gonna make sure he doesn't fly at my face. I enjoyed this one even more than I enjoyed Scarlet. I related a lot more to Cress as a character, kind of similar personality structures, and I'm also a sucker for the confident, cocky, asshole love interest, which just encapsulates Thorne. So I think that this actually was my favourite pairing in the entire series, and following their journey was just a bit more enjoyable than the others. Obviously, this book follows the story. A lot of our questions are being answered in this book. We're getting a lot more plot points happening, and you can really feel that it's ramping up to the end game, which is quite exciting. And again, the character intertwining and introducing the new point of views doesn't take away from the other characters that we've already met and we've already learned about. So I thought that that was really, really good. You can see how Marissa is kind of growing as a writer across these books, and she has a real talent of getting us to like the main characters of this book and be really invested in them and kind of forget about the other characters, at least for me. So yeah, that was Cress, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I completed again was an audiobook. My god, I was really bad at reading physical books at the start of June apparently, but it was The Hidden Life of Trees. This is the free audiobook for May, I think it was, through Audible, so I downloaded it because it sounded pretty interesting. I really enjoyed the start of this book, but I genuinely nearly, like if I was reading this in physical copy, I would have DNF'd it. I really did not enjoy the end. It read a lot like a textbook, which I didn't expect, especially because the start was almost like a podcast when you were listening to it. The first topics that he discussed I really did enjoy, with like the fungus networks and how the trees communicate and kind of what they do to protect themselves against the elements, and kind of how different trees are bred for different areas. But in saying that, towards the end, if you didn't have the information from the start of the book, I couldn't keep up with the end of the book. And I think that that was that real textbook feel. And I didn't have the brain power to maintain that. So I really passively ingested the last probably third of the book, maybe 2/3. And yeah, I gave it like 2.5 out of 5 stars because yeah, it wasn't my jam. Again, we're really hitting the audiobooks hard here. I listened to A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 4th time I read this series, or I am reading this series, and this is the first time I've listened to the first book. And I won't do it again. I don't mean to be awful, or terrible, but the narrator of the audiobook had a lisp and it just really grated me a little bit. Hi Samson, this stalking behaviour makes me really anxious. Please stop. I looked on Goodreads and at the end of March, start of June, every single year, I pick up this series. I'm not sure if it's because that's when the weather starts to get cold, if I've got seasonal affective disorder, I don't know what's happening, but I pick up this series every single time. Anyway, Court of Thorns and Roses, if you haven't heard of it, you probably are very new to BookTube or BookTok or whatever platform you're consuming book media on. It is a story that is kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but not, and it is set in this world where the main two populations of creatures are humans and fae. There are obviously other creatures and stuff elsewhere, but we follow a girl named Feyre who is starving because her family have lost all their money and she is the only one in the family that does hunt anything to, you know, get money and food and all that kind of stuff. And she one day shoots down a wolf that happens to be a fairy, and so she gets taken over the wall into the fairylands and the story unfolds from there. If you are young, don't read the series. There is a lot of adult content in these books, so fair warning there. I have said it before, I've spoken about this many times on my channel. The two new things, well, one, I still really hate Tamlin, it's just a constant, and the second is the narrator. So yeah, continue to give this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I actually read in like physical book, like I had it in my hands. It was a reread, but it is This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. I nearly forgot her name for a second there. This Savage Song is a kind of dystopian urban fantasy series, I think. It follows two main characters, Kate Harker and August Flynn. Kate is a human girl and August is a monster in this world where evil deeds by humans creates these monsters, and depending on the severity of the crime depends on the different type of monster that's created. And there are 3 types. There is the Corsai, the Malachi, and the Sunai, or the Sunai. And August is one of these Sunais. This was again a reread for me, and I remembered nothing of the series, of the world, until I jumped back into it, which was really nice. I reread this book because I was jumping into Our Dark Duet, which I hadn't read yet, and as I just said, I couldn't remember anything about the world or the series. This is also the first ebook that I have ever picked up, so I actually read this kind of ebook, physical book tandem. I read both. I have an entire video planned about different formats of books, so I won't talk too much to that, but I'm just letting you know that that's the format that I read this, and then also Our Dark Duet. Very well developed characters and a very well developed world. I find V.E. Schwab's writing in this to be amazing, engaging. It flowed really well. The banter was really good. The dynamics between the characters was really nice. Kate goes through a lot of character development in this book, which is really nice. And I really can't believe that I read this last time and then was left on that cliffhanger. Like, I don't know how I managed to survive knowing that the next book was not out at the point that I read it. So yeah, I really enjoyed This Savage Song, especially the second time around, because I think I appreciated it a bit more this time, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Once again, I read another audiobook. I will say I've read more audiobooks this month or the last 2 months because I downloaded my local library apps that have audiobooks that you can borrow and listen to. And it's just changed my world. Like, I've been like flying through books like nothing else because I drive a long way to work every day. And I also am an adult and I do things. And so I listen to audiobooks while I do things like cooking and cleaning. So the next book that I listened to was another audiobook, and it was Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo, the final book in the Grishaverse trilogy following Mal and, I forget her name, Alina. Y'all know my opinions on this series. I think it's fine. I don't think I would have made it through this book if I didn't listen to it, so I'm really glad that I did actually listen to it. I will say that it is the most interesting of the 3 in the series. I think it was probably my favorite out of the series. Pacing issues that I had from numbers 1 and 2 were pretty well fixed by this one as well, so I didn't have any of those concerns. Maybe that's because I listened to it, but I don't know. It was the easiest one for me to get through. There was a lot of action, there was a lot of angst, there was a lot of heartbreak going on in this book. The ending felt very wholesome and kind of like it worked. It was like an ending that worked, I think, which I also just didn't expect at all. I didn't know how, couldn't predict how the series was going to end. I couldn't like for the life of me, draw together some kind of hypothesis, and I'm glad that I couldn't, because I kind of just made it all that little bit better. I am glad I read the series. I won't do it again. I know that like high school, early university me would have loved this series, but adult me does not. And I think that that's where my dislike for the series kind of differentiates between everyone else's apparent love for the series, because they must have read it, or they probably have read it like ages ago when it first came out, when they were younger, and they have that sentimental value that I do not have with it. So I gave Ruin Rising a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Another audiobook, surprise, surprise, I listened to Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This is the second book in the Caraval series. In the first book in the series, we follow Scarlet, one of the sisters, and then in the second book, we actually follow her sister, Tella, or Donatella, and how Tella is now involved in the next Caraval game. At the start of the book, I was a bit hesitant because I didn't know how I was going to go reading from Tella's perspective. I didn't really like her in the first book. And then also I didn't really know where the book could go from here, because the first book kind of could have been a self-contained novel in itself. There were some unanswered questions, but I didn't think that it was enough to create a whole new book and story about. I was very confused about what trope was happening at the start, and then kind of we got a whole lot of new information and new components to this world that just ramped up. There was like a whole new lot of magic. There was all of these new characters, this entire new overarching story that we really didn't, well, I didn't feel like was too present in the first book. As the story continued on, I did really get to like Tella, and I think that she actually is my now preferred narrator over Scarlet. I think that she's a bit more headstrong and a bit more fun to read from. She seems to know a bit more what's going on than what Scarlet did. I loved that we still have the magical clothing component, and that we still get to sort of see these really like intricate thrown in little magical systems within something that very obviously is like a magical realism kind of world. And I think, yeah, the biggest thing that I really liked about this book is that I didn't know how to predict the end of the book. I didn't know what was going to happen, and it definitely shaped it perfectly for the last book, which is the final, ironically called the finale, which I am yet to get to, but I'm hoping to. And I gave Legendary a 4 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read, and this is like a physical book that I read this time, finally, and it's Our Dark Duet by V.E. Schwab. I've just spoken about This Savage Song. This is the sequel, so this continues the story after obviously the events of the first book. In this book, I really enjoyed that we got to see a bit more character development between Kate and August, and how the events of the last book have had a bit of a lasting impact between them. In this book, we also start to explore a different city, which is quite nice. I enjoyed that aspect of like branching out of this city of Verity. At the start of this book, we also get a whole new cast of characters, which is really nice. The first book was really good to kind of get to know Kate and August and all of like the main characters between Kate's dad and all of that kind of stuff. But now that we already had that world established, we could introduce this new cast of characters that you get immediately attached to. I really enjoyed them, like all of the characters in this series. It did really feel like there was like this really natural progression from the first book to the second book, and it kind of flowed really nicely. The pacing was also really good, which is something that I'm like a bit of a stickler for now. Never thought that I would be a pacing stickler, but I am. It was fabulously engaging. I think this was a series, and the first one in quite some time, that I wanted to go back to and to pick up. I think that that's the mark of a really good book for me, when I want to stop doing all the things that I have to do and actually go and sit down and read the story, because I really want to be re-immersed in that world. And because this is a duology, this is the last book in the series, the ending was good. I really hate series endings. I'm always like really anxious that it's not going to be what I want it to be, or it's not going to be satisfactory, but V.E. Schwab did a very good job at ending this. Yeah. It was good. I liked Our Dark Duet. It was really nice to read the series one after the other, and it was really nice to do it in a very short amount of time. So I gave Our Dark Duet a 4 out of 5 stars. So yes, these and a few others that are not pictured here are all the books that I read in June. Let me know what you thought of these books. As I say at the end of every video, I love to talk to people in the comments, even if I'm really bad at replying sometimes. I'm sorry. I do really enjoy communicating with everyone and knowing that like people enjoy the stuff that I make, so that's nice. But as I said, thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. To the story. Oh boy. What are you doing?